Book 3. The Council of the Ages. Chapter 4. The fact of bringing together the most outstanding warriors of their generation for a mission concrete is already something extraordinary, but let us not forget the consequences of one's own Council for the History of Mercenaries, the Council of the Ages. Author, De Olgin. After the hectic presentation they were taken to their chambers to enjoy a short rest before dinner. The rooms chosen to accommodate them were not located in the best area of the Palace of Heaven. However, Arion could see the golden dome of the Room of Creation and the great waterfall from his quarters. It was already dusk, the sun was setting behind the waterfall and the dome. The twilight made the water of the waterfall take on a color between reddish and golden. For an instant it reminded him of the waterfall of 1,000 colors. Aris came to wake her from her reverie. They've had trouble accommodating Sabu, but there's a barn next door and he's going to be able to rest more or less well. Arion smiled. Gosberg's son was already used to his large size causing him certain problems. And the rest? They are on the lower floor. Gosberg has protested since, according to him, the sheets he has on the bed are of human manufacture and not elf. And what does that matter? Well, it's an elf kingdom. The first kingdom, everything should be of elf origin. Arion smiled. The Denka always came up with very strange things. They won't have time to knit bedding, perhaps. Or they don't consider us worthy of the elves, Arion. I'm still surprised to be alive here. Arion took a seat next to Aris and grabbed her hand. You have been very strong. I know it's hard for you. This is where they inserted your father's head into a spear. In reality, it is past. We annihilate an elven kingdom. What I do not forgive is the Emperor's betrayal. But the elves did not treat my father's remains with a modicum of respect. There are more important things than that right now. The half-orc kissed her on the mouth, before acknowledging that she was right. It's for Shannari's sake. Aris whispered in an attempt to convince himself. Orcs, elves, and men live in Shannari's itself. If we don't destroy the threat that looms over us, no one in all of Shannari's will be safe. We must be united. United, this has not happened for thousands of years. The demons of the Black Abyss have not returned for thousands of years. The conversation ended abruptly. They fell silent. As the trip was organized in a hurry and there was a rush to get to Borderlania. The luggage they carried was the bare minimum, so they didn't have a proper outfit to wear to the dinner of honor. They must have used their current clothes. So they groomed themselves as best they could. In the evening they were called to attend the supper in honor of the Council of Ages. The mercenaries grouped together. They did not carry weapons, since it was forbidden to carry them at dinner. They trusted, they had the word of the great king of the elves. A chamberlain arrived to look for them and guide them to the great hall where the banquet was being held. The entourage went south of their rooms, surrounded by beautiful gardens. They walked for a long time. The dinner was held inside a large building with huge windows. The entrance to the service was full of waiters who crowded together with a certain disorder, bringing the food and drinks with which the great king wanted to give his guests. They had to wait their turn until they were announced by the chamberlain who guided them, although the way in which they were announced to the rest of the guests did not sit well with them at all. Arion, High Priestess of the god Elaban and her companions. His companions. They all looked down on the chamberlain, Arion's companions. The High Priestess had to calm the mercenary spirits by gesturing for them to descend the stairs with her. They were totally ignored after the announcement. The great hall was spectacular, a huge enclosure lit by elven stones. That gave a pink hue to the room. As was customary in Shannari's high society before dinner, there was a kind of banquet, where cold snacks were placed at a large table and waiters served drinks in beautiful glasses made of brightly colored glass. The guests chatted in a relaxed way. The group did not seem very comfortable in the midst of so many high-ranking guests, all in their gala clothes and spectacular jewelry, while they wore their humble mercenary field clothes. The first to join was Gosberg as always, who ordered 2 drinks and began to talk to a guest dressed in stranger's clothes. Colors. Arian was invited to go to the great king of the elves who requested her presence. So after a while they ended up dispersing. Except for Agnoruk, Kush, the Kendeli, the orcs, and Sabu, who stayed in the background eating a little and isolated from the rest. Kritis and Tanya had moved away from the group to go get some drinks since the waiters did not approach the group of mercenaries that were located in the background. Dwarfs were used to the indifference of others, after all, they were dwarfs. Tanya did not get along particularly well with Kritis. The ancient enmity between the dwarfs of the hills and the dwarfs of the ridge was something that conditioned their relationship. Tanya was very careful to stay away from the entourage of the Dragon Dorsal Kingdom. In the distance she could see her father drinking and chatting animatedly with some members of his entourage. There was Ankana. As she detested that dwarf, he was Derek's younger brother. He also led the Protectors of the Throne, the king's personal guard. He would surely blame him for his brother's death. A pity he wasn't in the blood mines. Many better dwarfs than him had died there. And he did not die in the Battle of Burning Hill either, since like a good rat he had the talent of sneaking away in difficult moments. The dwarf decided to drink to forget her sorrows and hatreds. That's when they approached a bartender to get some drink that, although it wasn't beer, at least made the stay at the party somewhat enjoyable. Kritis. How many years without seeing you? The dwarf turned his head in surprise. He didn't expect any of the guests to know his name.
Anora, are you? A dwarf of the age of Kritis appeared before them, according to Tanya's calculations, although for the rest of the Sharnaries races it is difficult to calculate the exact age of a dwarf. The dwarf was accompanied by an entourage of hill dwarfs. Kritis found it difficult to assimilate the presence of the dwarf in the room because it was something totally unexpected. Tanya immediately recognized who they were, dwarfs of the hills. It was an embassy from the city of Lismeria, in the kingdom of Lanos. This kingdom was located in the southern hemisphere of Sharnaries, where most of the hill dwarfs migrated after their banishment. Tanya, belonging to the nobility, knew well the genealogy of the rest of the dwarf royal families, which were not many either. The dwarf was Anora Fatfoot, widow of the king's firstborn prince. She was the queen's envoy for the Council of the Ages. Fallen Colin Pardas. Brownhills. You're a Brownhill. Kritis watched Tanya suspiciously as she discovered a secret that few in the company knew. Anora smiled. The second son of King Byasterius Brownhills. But didn't the second son die when the city of Bartalium fell? Tanya asked surprised. As if he were dead. Kritis disowned the dwarfs of the hills, never accepted that we did not retreat before the Stufos. The dwarf did not open his mouth at Anora's words, he was just staring at her. Your sister, the queen, misses you, Kritis. The queen and all of you are cowards. It was a war that could not be won. We leave the land of our ancestors. Tanya was surprised. Kritis did not seem to accept Anora's explanations and left Shotgun to where the rest of his companions were. The dwarf bowed to Anora as a farewell gesture and followed Kritis. You're a prince. Like you. And look what it is for. Not a word to anyone or you will receive a bolt from me in the ass. Does anyone know? The little Denkga put me in everything. They reached the height of the rest of the group, who were leaning in their corner, few integrated into the superficially relaxed atmosphere. Arian and Aris, since he was his partner, were integrated into the environment. Another who moved like a fish in water was Gosberg, who was able to strike up a conversation with many people while drinking 2 or 3 drinks at the same time. He was the center of attention, as always. Gosberg's uninhibited attitude caused envy on the part of the other mercenaries. Loranthas also approached some elves who came from her homeland and began to talk animatedly with them. Being of elf blood, he could integrate perfectly in the midst of the numerous groups that were chatting in a lively way. Kush had placed himself in a secluded position within the group. The magician watched with interest everything that happened in the hall, Many of the most important cultures of mercenaries were represented in the Council of the Ages, and it was the only opportunity to see so many great kings together. He had observed Critus's talk with the embassy of the dwarfs of the hills, which ended in a not very friendly way. But then he saw how a person stared at him. They had not seen each other for years, of course, but she was still as beautiful and powerful as ever. Her name, Gabla Lamaria. Gabla's personal guard came up to where Kush was and they bowed their heads. Kush responded in kind, the guards pointing to where Gabla was sitting. Kush decided to advance towards it through the entire room. Gabla was alone. Someone from Teach Isis didn't usually interact with the rest of the mercenaries people. It was very strange that they had come to the call of the king of Bordalania. The lady was savoring a glass of elf wine in a leisurely manner when she observed Kush's arrival. The magician assumed that Gabla knew of his presence at the council. After all, she was the great Gabla. Gabla's personal guard placed a chair next to the grand lady, in a position below her. Only the king had the right to stand above Gabla. Or her atom. Kush Asmara. Your shadows honor me, Gabla. Kush had long since exiled himself from Teach Isis, but he still remembered the way he treated Gabla, and that was recognizing that she was superior to him. The displays of power when it came to treating Gabla never ended well. Your father told me that everyone misses you, Namish. And so did I. There was some bitterness in Gabla's words. Kush kept his gaze. I hadn't thought about that time for a long time. Everyone is looking forward to your return. It can't be. Don't forget, I'm guilty. I was only saved from the death sentence because I was the son of the king. He spared my life unjustly. The people were offended by that, certainly. But now it is forgotten and they will accept your return. I made a mistake and the gods wanted me not to pay for it with my life. But that decision of my father's provoked war among our people. Gabla took a sip of the drink. Namish. It was only an excuse. The poison looks for any small wound to rot. I think it will take time for Gabla to forget. Those who remember it the most are no longer a problem. Namish, I took care of them personally. It is not the time. The magician again rejected Gabla's offer. I have the impression that you will never return home. Kush stood up bowing to the great Gabla Lamaria to disappear into the crowd. The doors of the hall opened and the guests entered another large room where the banquet was to be held. The great room was a huge place, where all the guests were received by a series of butlers who indicated to each one their place in the room. Arian and Aris were seated at the head table next to the great kings. The rest of the group were placed at the table furthest from the room, next to the waiter's entrance, and on the other side there was a huge column that hid them from the rest. Sabu took a seat in an area next to the wall, without a chair. Agnoruk had to stand on the outermost side of the table. Although they were at the end of the large room, they were attended to in a correct way. There was never a lack of food or drink. Bottles of elf wine, spirits, maybe beer was scarcer than expected. The meal consisted almost entirely of fruits, vegetables, cheeses, nuts. But there was no shortage of fish and seafood. The only meat they saw was from a species of bird of a considerable size that they served roasted. But the dishes tasted nice and were delicately spiced. Perhaps for the orcs the food was a bit bland. An orchestra played soft, harmonic music that accompanied the meal. The truth is that the evening was quite pleasant, and the mercenaries began to drink an enormous amount of wine. They were very hungry, after so much travel. In addition, it was a food that was quickly devoured, with 4 orcs and 2 hungry denkies apart from the dwarfs who did not moderate themselves at mealtime either. The only one who seemed to behave with some restraint was Kush. It was the table where the most people ate by far. After an hour many of the waiters seemed to only serve at the table at the back. That made many pay attention to those strange guests who were eating and drinking as if there was no tomorrow. Even Arian, who was quite far away, ended up noticing them. He was happy because it seemed that they were having a great time, against the sobriety of the table of honor where the food was barely touched. They were obviously not alone, but their jovial and carefree character contrasted greatly with the seriousness of the other tables. At the next table were a number of elven knights, who were placed there by a Machiavellian idea of Prince Erinch. He had assigned to that table all the knights of the order he detested by way of insult. Paulana was one of those chosen wretches.
Like all elven knights, the presence of orcs in the Palace of the Heavens repulsed them, but the orders were clear: to tolerate them and do the impossible so that conflicts did not arise no matter how much it cost. Any disobedience of this order would imply a very harsh sanction, being banished to the mines of the shadows in an all-out fight against the Stufos, which was almost certain death. Only those whom the Elven King wanted to see far away and dead were destined there. Erinsh's idea was to entertain himself by seeing if any of his knights defied his orders, and the truth was that the mercenaries were helping as much as possible to make the prince's idea come true. Paulana, who was fed up with the hatred that Enrich had for her, she also had to add that she could not stand those shabby mercenaries who were drinking and eating all the reserves of her kingdom. I had never seen so much eating and drinking, not even dwarfs. Among the elves it was rude to eat a lot and greedily. You always had to show moderation, especially at a dinner as elegant as this. Everything they did was a provocation for her. Her companions glanced sideways from time to time at their neighbors at the table and babbling among themselves. They threw little jabs at those bastards. That was the only consolation they had left, knowing that they could not do anything else. The truth is that to be the victors of the Iron Wars they looked more like beggars than great warriors. They should wear bright armor and have a torso full of medals. However, they wore ragged clothes full of patches. Dinner was nearing its conclusion, and the laughter of the mercenaries had subsided a little. It was time for dessert. Kritus and Gosberg got into a fight over the last glass of elven rose liqueur, which was a delight, the best of the dinner. They played for the last cup by lottery, as it could not be otherwise. The Denker won. Kritus accused Gosberg of cheating. Angrily, the dwarf threw the glass overflowing with liquor at the Denker, who dodged it with agility and ended up hitting Paulana squarely, staining her beautiful golden mane. The elf did not take the unfortunate accident very well. She was already a little fed up with the continuous noises and screams from the other table. Agnoruk stood up to apologize as he didn't want to leave Arian and a Boke bad. But Paulana was outraged, as many of the mercenaries and other guests couldn't help but laugh at the sight of the rose liqueur in her hair. What the elf lacked was to be the laughingstock of the evening. Troll shit! Paulana called the half-orc. Agnoruk endured the provocation. There should be no fights, he had promised Arian. Our apologies, it was an unfortunate accident. The half-orc tried to be as kind as he could. Damn coward! Voron Lamata. Your mother should have killed you at birth. Paulana insulted him while the comment provoked laughter from his fellow elves. Agnoruk being insulted in that way was something he did not tolerate well. Even so, he sighed and turned around so as not to start a fight. Paulana also turned to her table to have the party in peace. She did not want to cheer up Prince Enrich. Everything seemed to have calmed down, but Gosberg threw with a very quick and almost imperceptible gesture a new glass of liquor at the elf. It hit her head again and then bounced towards Agnoruk, hitting him at the same time as Paulana. No one really knew where that cup came from, but it didn't matter either. The fuse was lit. They both turned and began to fight among themselves, calling each other everything. They were all already hot, and the other members of both tables joined the fight, to the amazement of the rest of the guests and the anger of Arian and the king of the elves. The music stopped. They managed to separate the others thanks mostly to Kirsch, but Agnoruk and Paulana continued to fight despite everyone's attempts to stop their duel. In the end the two contestants left the building. The fight continued in the gardens until Agnoruk himself did not hold back anymore and punched the elf that left her half-stunned. Arian, who had risen next to Aris, came out of the hall and shouted at the half-orc to stop fighting. Agnoruk, enough please. Agnoruk turned around, and it was then that Paulana took advantage of this distraction to kick him in the lower areas of the half-orc, which caused him such great pain that it even caused hiccups. The rest of the audience took pity on Agnoruk. It had been a terrible blow. Paulana began to laugh when she saw the scene of seeing Agnoruk screaming in pain and hiccuping. The half-orc did not take it very well. Despite the tremendous pain, he was able to recover and took the elf by the neck and then threw her towards a hedge and went after her. It took 8 elven knights, Kritus, Aris and the help of Sabu to prevent Agnoruk from skinning Paulana with his own hands. As they were unable to stop fighting, they were both taken to the dungeons, while exchanging insults and remembering all the ancestors of the other's family. With the expulsion of Agnoruk and Paulana, things returned to normal. The guests returned to their assigned places, while the elf and the half-orc disappeared. Their insults gradually stopped being heard. The king of the elves was frankly annoyed by Paulana's indiscipline. Inrinch smiled satisfied. It had worked better than expected. He could sanction all the knights at the table, but especially the elf. Agnoruk would stay in the dungeon tonight to calm down, but Aris indicated that they would accept the punishment that would be meted out to Agnoruk, since it was not an attitude worthy of a mercenary of the Blue Phoenix Company either. The dinner ended with a play to celebrate the Council of the Ages. Some of the great monarchs disappeared, but many guests stayed to see the show. Dancers performed to the music and voices of an elf choir, a play that dealt with the role of elves during the wars against demons during the First Era. The light was very subtle. Arian saw the work for a while, but she was very tired, so she left after a few minutes. Only Kush and Loranthus stayed to contemplate the entire work. The music was sad. When it came out, they were narrating the defeat of the elves by the demons. Once outside, she felt relieved. That work had something sinister about it. He tried to see if he could catch up with the rest, but they were probably already in their chambers. Arian decided to walk slowly to gaze at the starry sky. Surprisingly, he came across a young girl who was sitting on a railing on the terrace. The girl seemed happy since she had a large piece of cake in her hands. Her face expressed happiness for dessert, but to Arian's surprise this face was rounded, not as elongated and stylized as that of the elves, although her pointed ears stood out. That gave Arian the intuition that the girl was half-breed. The girl smiled as she saw Arian coming towards her. She wore a beautiful golden combination made of a fabric very similar to that worn by the great king of the elves in his evening dress. The beautiful dress was complemented by simple diamond earrings and a gold headband. Arian stood right in front of the girl, who didn't seem at all frightened or uncomfortable in the presence of the priestess. "Hello. Want a piece of the blackberry pie? Today Amnabona, the royal cook, has surpassed himself." Arian was not very fond of sweets, although her daughter liked them very much since Gosberg used to offer her. Not to be impolite, he accepted the piece offered by the girl. For a second his fingers touched and Arian noticed something familiar about the stranger. The truth is that the cake was very good. It was not very cloying and the blackberry flavor was very noticeable. She tasted it with pleasure and admonished herself for not having tasted this delicacy during dinner. The girl smiled when she saw Arian's reaction. "What's your name?" "Donata." "Nice name. Mine is Arian." "Ah. You are very beautiful." Arian blushed a little at the girl's words, but now she was intrigued by Donata's presence in the palace. What was a mixed-race girl doing within the king's most personal circle? When it was known that the elves of Bordalania did not have a great sympathy for the half-breeds. "Donata, do you live here with the elves?" "Of course, I was born in this place." That was even stranger, but suddenly a maid appeared who apologized to Arian and called out to Donata, who smiled when she saw the young elf appear. Donata ran out to get lost in the gardens. The maid sighed and went after the girl. Arian watched as Donata escaped from the elf until she disappeared. Then he noticed the jewel that she had hanging around her neck. It was something very subtle, but it shone faintly. Now he was no longer sleepy. He went back into the large room to see how the play with Kush ended. Then all the guests retreated to their chambers. When Arian arrived at his room, Aris was fast asleep. She thought of Donata again. She looked familiar. That girl had something known. But the heaviness after dinner, the fatigue of the trip and the meetings took their toll on her. She quickly fell asleep hugging the half-orc. Tomorrow would be another very long day.